Welcome to this pivotal panel on which is focused on crafting an integrated coastal management strategy for the Indo-Pacific region. Before we delve into how, let's take a moment to reflect on why the coast. For our general self, the mere term immediately conjures images of our idyllic holidays in Goa, Thailand, and Mauritius. Its stunning beaches, snorkeling adventures, and intricate shell arts. Now, take a step deeper, and more of our academic selves have observed how each of these otherwise fun aspect of coast underscores the vibrant ecosystem, economic vitality, and cultural richness that's inherent in these coastal areas. However, the picturesque image is at crossroads. The escalating impact of human activities and climate change presents unprecedented challenges to our coastal ecosystem. Our duty is clear. We must navigate a path towards a harmonious existence between coastal communities and the vast wealth that the oceans provide us. The Indo-Pacific region, with its unparalleled biodiversity and economic importance, calls for careful consideration and unified action. The panel discussion serves as a compass which would guide us through the imperative of integrated coastal management strategies for the Indo-Pacific, from the protection of biodiversity and preservation of natural habitats to resilience of coastal communities against the rising tide of climate change. Our panel today would seek to uncover the intricate tapestry of reasons why responsible integrated coastal management is not just a choice but a necessity. Our esteemed panelists who have joined here bring a wealth of diverse expertise, and together we will chart out a course through challenges and capitalize on the opportunities. I'll start with Professor Sugata Hazra. Sir, considering the vulnerability of mangroves to climate change, what specific measures and policies should be incorporated into integrated coastal management strategies to safeguard the mangrove ecosystem and ensure resilience in the Indo-Pacific region?
I think taking cue from the title of the seminar, that is a mangrove symphony. The first thing, while we try to save something, either it may be trapped workers in tunnels in Himalaya, or the mangrove standing alone in front of the rising sea level and climate change and rising intensities and frequencies of cyclone, we must know that what we are trying to save. Then it comes how. So taking stock of the situation of mangroves in the largest mangrove forest of Sundarban in India, I must say that our knowledge about mangroves is still in a developing stage. Because we published an article in 2022 that we have lost 110 square kilometers of mangrove forest from Sundarban, just from the sea-facing islands, in 20 years. Because we are having a very high rate of sea level rise compared to the other parts of India, that is more than 5 millimeter per year. It is now 6.5. And, well, there is a loss of sediment supply in the delta. As I think I have heard something about the why mangroves, I am against mangrove or something like that. I am trying to say that mangroves are not saving Sundarbans. Yes, it is a time to save the mangroves rather than mangroves trying to save us. Because we are at Calcutta in the western part of the delta, and the mangroves, a patch of 2,000 square kilometers, is lying in the southeastern corner. And when the cyclones enters from the Bay of Bengal, it generally takes a straight path like Ayla or Amphan, or it takes a western swing. I mean eastern swing towards east, which bypasses the mangroves in the east and directly hits Goshaba or Hingalganj with a storm surge and storm. So it is not like mangroves as such, but the position of mangroves vis-a-vis your civilizations, your settlements. So this is the point number one, that we are losing mangroves, the area as well as the health of the mangroves, because we have less fresh water. The Hooghly fresh water comes from the west of the delta. It doesn't enter like previously it used to enter from Matla, from Bidyadhari, from Horinbanga, from Ichamoti, which flows through central part of the Sundarban between Bangladesh and India. So all of them has lost their freshwater supply. So where from the sediments will come? It will be carried from Farakka. So we are really faced with this mangrove soldiers fighting against climate change, doing carbon sequestration, helping in siltation. But we are not nourishing them. We are not giving them enough food to grow. So the Bangladesh mangroves are much higher. Indian mangroves are crippled, rickety, and thinner, less above ground biomass than Bangladesh mangrove, because they are getting the huge freshwater supply from the Brahmaputra that we are not getting from the Ganges. So this is a taking stock of the situation, so that if I want to protect the mangrove, what is to be done? This protection is not just plantation. Yes, we have lost 110 square kilometer, but we have done a plantation in these 20 years in the human habitation part, 84 square kilometer. So nearly compensating the blue carbon loss. However, this doesn't compensate from the loss of ecosystem service, like a conservation area for the tigers, because that is shrinking. So what is to be done? I'll come to the question in the later part of the discussion. But another important stock is about the stock of the fisheries in the Bay of Bengal. So we have a lot of hue and cry always, not this year, we have got a better Hilsa catch. But the Hilsas are declining, we are not getting enough supply, we are taking from Bangladesh and Myanmar, like that. So let us have a coordination with them, number one. Number two is that, why it is reducing? Because of overfishing. It is not due to climate change. But have you done any assessment of the stock in the Bay of Bengal of the different species? Not that you have taken any stock of the mangroves. Which species is where? Where is the map? Where is Heritiera? Where is Nipa fruticans? Where are the saltwater loving mangroves like Abyssinia, Bruguera, and other species? Does Forest Department have a map? They are talking about leader survey now, because I was shouting that we are still measuring our height of the islands, which will be submerging by sea level rise of 1 meter from the level of Karachi, which has been transported to Mumbai after the independence. But then land has gone up, land has gone down, sea level is going up. This is not the real altitude of the islands or the topography of the island you generally see. So if you don't know which fishes are how much in the Bay of Bengal, what is the catch size in the first catch? Because Hilsa we are used to get previously 700 grams and 800 grams naturally. Now we are getting 110 grams in the first catch. So think of the pressure on the species. So if you have to fight climate change, because as I was discussing, that one part is sea level rise climate change for the mangrove, but the other part is conversion of 200 hectares of mangroves only to aquaculture farms. And that too, don't believe that this is because of the salinity rise in the delta, because that is another paper that we have already proved that all the entire aquaculture farm areas are 120 kilometers away from the sea coast. It is in the Harwa, Minakhan, Sondeshkali 1, Sondeshkali 2, Hasnabad and Hingalganj in the North 24 Parganas. So you can see that this is basically market which is driving them, nearness to Calcutta rather than nearness to the sea. So where is the threat? What is the threat? What is the perception? What are the processes that are controlling the loss or growth of mangroves? Loss and growth of fisheries, that becomes a dynamic situation, not that you can just plan for 20 years. Climate adaptation plan has to be very dynamic. We'll come into the details because I have already finished my time, it seems. Thank you very much.
Yes, Professor Hazra, we'll come back to you, and thank you so much for taking us through the risk, the current and the potential risk to the mangroves and its ecosystem. I'll now move to Professor Amarasinghe. Her research has focused extensively on coastal wetland ecology. Professor Amarasinghe, my question to you is that in the context of integrated coastal management, how can we address the importance of coastal wetlands in maintaining the biodiversity, providing the ecosystem services, and mitigating the impact of climate change on these fragile ecosystems? Professor, over to you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So this is about, sorry, there's some space missing here, but anyway, importance of biodiversity and ecological services of coastal wetlands. This is something that we know for years, right? We know that higher the diversity, higher the ecological services that they can provide. Okay, so therefore we are interested in conserving biodiversity because biodiversity allows an ecosystem to have many interactions, myriads of interactions between their components. So that will finally manifest as services, like all these production services, regulatory ones, and so on and so forth. So therefore, these interactions are the bottom line or the lifeline. So if these interactions are not taking place properly, then the rest is also going to vanish. So if we look at the factors that are affecting interactions, since they are sitting in water most of the time, hydrology has a major role as a driver. And so hydrology can change salinity and also nutrients, availability of nutrients. All these plants need nutrients, and they are adapted to salinity. And we just heard, and also in the morning, how Sundarbans mangroves are affected by high salinity because of not having enough fresh water from the river. But in elsewhere, there are other scenarios. I will get into that in the next slide. And also, these components, like for instance, plants and animals and all the other abiotic components, they are sitting in the same place and interacting, and they provide habitats for all these animals, including humans, to survive in these areas, to get their resources from. So the biodiversity is dependent on how well these interactions are taking place, and also the trophic relationships that finally end up in the welfare of humans, because they depend on the fish and for their nutrition and also for their livelihoods. So therefore, maintaining diversity is maintaining interactions. So increasing salinity, we know how it affects, because it has affected certain species to extinct or to die and so on. And at the same time, there are certain instances, for instance, in Sri Lanka, in coastal lagoons, we frequently face the problem of decreasing salinity. Now, this is a map of a coastal wetland called Boondala wetland, and this is the first Ramsar wetland in Sri Lanka. And it was a saline lagoon, but now we did this study in the last couple of years, and we found that all the halophytes, or the saline salinity tolerating plants, have been replaced by freshwater plants, because the whole ecosystem has become fresh. So therefore, you can imagine the kind of changes that would have, ecological changes that would have happened. So therefore, the type of plants that are there are different, the animals that are there are different. So therefore, the people who are dependent on these lagoon resources also have undergone changes, because they couldn't catch all the shrimps that they were catching some years ago, but instead they are catching some other species which are not that not that expensive as the crustaceans or the shrimps and so on. So their socio-economic life also had affected, their livelihoods had affected. And at the same time, well, how has this, we wanted to find out how this lagoon had become so freshwater, fresh, because of the inland irrigation systems that allow all the drainage water to get into this lagoon. So it has gradually become saline, and it has led to a lot of ecological changes. So therefore, the mangroves have got affected, the salt marshes have got affected, and now it has been replaced by these freshwater plants. So therefore, it has affected not only the animals or the aquatic life, but also the human life as well. And therefore, it's very clear that when we design our development activities, then we have to take into account all the coastal lands, including coastal wetlands as well, because all the water that is draining down to the river, to the ocean, will finally end up in these wetlands. So anything that affects the hydrology of these wetlands will affect the ecology, and therefore the services, the ecological services that these ecosystems are providing. And such as carbon sequestration. So this is a study that we did some time ago on measuring how much carbon is retained by different mangrove areas, and we found that in general, because in different climatic zones, they sequester in different rates, and at the same time, all these areas are microtidal. That means they are tidal amplitude, the difference between high and low tides are very low, like it's about 50 centimeters. The highest tide that we have ever experienced is like 89 centimeters, so it's microtidal. But what we found was the amount of carbon that is retained in soil was much higher than in the macrotidal mangrove areas. So I haven't included that data here, but this is what we found. The carbon that were retained here in these soils, the microtidal mangroves, were much higher than the macrotidal areas, because it's obvious, because it gets flushed out with these high tidal currents, or the stronger tidal currents, and so on. So therefore, this kind of, now this is very relevant to climate change, and the service that these wetlands provide through its capacity to sequester carbon has also changed, because the hydrology has undergone change, and therefore the species composition has it has changed too, and therefore the capacity of these carbon sequestration comes from the ability of these different plants to absorb carbon dioxide and sequester them in their roots and plant biomass, and also in the soil. So therefore, when the components change, when the plants change, their capacities also change. So, and also this is just for you to understand that these, we know it already, that mangroves and other coastal wetlands will sequester much more carbon than any terrestrial ecosystems. And therefore, if we want to sustain these very life-saving functions or services, then we have to take into account the kind of services that they provide already. As the previous speaker was pointing out, do we really know how much it serves? What kind of, to what extent it serves as all these different, for these different functions, for instance, as carbon sinks, or making oxygen, for instance, and also providing habitats and so on and so forth. So therefore, integrated approach needs still more information, still more knowledge for us to have very pragmatic as well as pragmatic proposals or pragmatic mechanism to save them. And therefore, it's not advisable, or it's not prudent to just concentrate on smaller areas. Now in Sri Lanka, it happens all the time because our intertidal zones are very narrow, and therefore our mangrove areas are confined to very smaller patches most of the time. So therefore, people are drawing management plans for these smaller areas without taking into consideration what's happening around it. The irrigation is not their problem because irrigation is happening far interior. So therefore, they are not interested in it. And the irrigation planners are also not interested in it because the mangroves are sitting far away. So therefore, they are not taking those into account when they are planning and diverting water all over the place. And therefore, it's for one to have a more realistic and sustainable management of these resources, they have to become a bit regional, or they shouldn't concentrate in localities where you find these patches of mangroves, but they have to be taken the surrounding areas, depending on where it is and what is surrounding them. They also have to be taken into consideration, and what's happening there, and what kind of activities are going on, and what kind of activities are planned in those areas, which can affect the downstream areas and so on. So this integrated approach, which should not be confined to smaller areas, but larger areas, will gain more practical solutions than otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Amarasinghe, for a very insightful presentation. I would quickly move to Dr. Taina Loureiro. She's a marine scientist, and you have contributed to the handbook on blue carbon. Dr. Taina, my question to you, following up on the blue carbon ecosystem that Professor Amarasinghe has already discussed in her presentation, is that how can we balance the conservation of blue carbon ecosystem with the socio-economic development goals of the Indo-Pacific region, and what strategies particularly can be implemented to promote sustainable practices in these critical coastal ecosystem? Dr. Taina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Aparna. Yeah, so as I was saying, this balance you asked about between prosperity and conservation, it is critical. And an important thing is that we don't want to ensure prosperity only now, but we want to ensure it for future as well. We want future opportunities. We want wealth and well-being. And for example, overfishing might yield immediate economic benefits, but it also depletes resources for future generations. And well, if we want the maintenance of wealth and well-being now and in the future, we can achieve that. To achieve that, we need to ensure that we are using natural resources in a way that supports our needs and our priorities in long term. And that means bridging environmental health and wealth. Informed, evidence-based governance of blue carbon ecosystems is critical to balance the conservation of those ecosystems with the socio-economic development goals of the Indo-Pacific region. And well, multiple approaches can help achieve this balance. Integrated coastal zone management, marine spatial planning, marine protected area, and others. All these governance tools and approaches allow for a holistic consideration of various factors in coastal management. They provide a framework for balancing the different and often competing interests and uses of coastal areas, ensuring that conservation and development can coexist sustainably. But the thing is that all those frameworks and the trade-off decisions they help us with, they depend on data, they depend on information. And we cannot manage what we cannot measure, right? So for that, I see ocean accounting as an essential strategy. Ocean accounting is a transformative approach to comprehensively measure ocean's contribution to society, making the ocean more visible, supporting sustainable and equitable ocean planning and management. And it also helps attracting financing opportunities to scale investment in conservation. The Ocean Accounting Framework provides a strategy for developing integrated records of regularly compiled and comparable data concerning ocean environmental assets, for example, the extent and the condition of mangroves, as well as economic activities, such as the sale of fish, and social conditions, for example, coastal employment. So this approach enables organizing social, economic, and environmental information into integrated indicators that can help policymakers and stakeholders understand the implications of various actions and make choices that balance conservation with development needs. So when you ask about strategies to promote sustainable practices in blue carbon ecosystems, my answer is evidence-based decision-making that is underpinned by ocean accounts, where the ecosystem services provided by these ecosystems are identified and recurrently measured in both physical and monetary terms. But not only the provision of ecosystem services is tracked, also ecosystems' extent and condition, their contribution to economy and our well-being, and very important, who is benefiting from those ecosystems. The last one is an important and frequently overlooked one, because when we talk about sustainable development, of course, we talk about conservation, we talk about restoration, and we talk about responsible use of resources. But we also talk about inclusivity and equitability. And we need to be able to measure and to track those aspects. We need to be able to track the opportunities provided by the blue carbon ecosystems and how they are being shared. This understanding helps integrating those values into national and regional economic planning and development strategies. And lastly, stakeholder engagement and community involvement cannot be overstated. The success of any coastal management strategy largely depends on the participation and the buy-in of local communities, industries, and other stakeholders. Their knowledge, needs, and values should be integral to the decision-making process, ensuring that strategies are not only environmentally sustainable, but also socially equitable and economically viable. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taina. Those were a great set of recommendations that you've put forward. I'll call on Ms. Unaisi Malani. She is the program manager for Great Sea Reef Program, WWF Fiji. Unaisi, what role do green sea reefs play in the overall health of coastal ecosystems, and how can integrated management strategies be devised to ensure that their preservation, that they are preserved on the face of climate change threats? Unaisi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Aparna, and Bola Binaka to everyone. As mentioned, I'm Unaisi. I'm from Fiji, and I'm joining you from in Lambasa, in one of the major towns in Fiji. So I work with WWF Pacific, and we have offices across the Pacific, but only in Solomon Islands and in Papua New Guinea. And our main HQ is in Fiji. So in Fiji, we work across the Great Sea Reef Program, as mentioned, and that spans across 4 provinces across Fiji. So we have about 14 provinces, and these are the 4 that the Great Sea Reef Program, or the Great Sea Reef, actually spans across. And you can see it's starting from this point here up in Undu, and it comes right down here. And it's one of the the longest reef systems here in the southern hemisphere. And some researchers have shown that some reefs are less exposed and more vulnerable to climate change impacts. And there are about 7 countries that have these 70% of these climate resilient coral reefs. And some of them are also found in Fiji, in the upper area of this vulnerable island. So in terms of the question, in terms of green coral reefs, some of the areas of some of the significances of the coral reef systems is that it provides a great biodiversity support for some of the biggest advantages of coral reef systems are those of coastal protection, and that it's providing protection for communities that are vulnerable and that live along the coastal systems, and they are crucial to livelihoods for communities that also live along the coast, providing a great area of biodiversity, but also the diversity, allowing diversity for biodiversity within these ocean systems. I think there was much spoken about integrated management and how crucial it is for the protection and for the continued protection of these coastal ecosystems. For your information, in Fiji, we 90% of lands is owned by the indigenous communities, and in terms of the ocean or the inshore area, it's also owned or customarily owned by the indigenous people. So it is very crucial to engage communities in the overall awareness of impacts that they're facing of climate change that they're facing on their inshore areas, but not only that, on the impacts that they have on the fishing, the types of fishing gear that they use, the strategies that not just communities, but also working with local governments to ensure that everyone is aware of the significance of these reef systems. In Fiji, the Great Sea Reef, or portion of the Great Sea Reef, is where 75% of fish comes from and is being fed into the urban areas. So livelihood factor is a very key component of this reef system. This significance is being communicated to communities as well as to local government and national government as well. And the need to integrate strategies of management and of sustainable development. I mean, no one is saying no to development of any kind, but just to ensure that there is an awareness of the impacts of certain developments that may hinder, and that may escalate the impacts that these coral reefs are facing, in addition to climate change impacts, which of course we understand are looking at coral bleaching due to warming of seas. So as mentioned, like the inshore areas or the coastal areas are divided up into fishing grounds, and so each province or each district will share a fishing ground area, and that's divided up into the blocks, as you may see across the Great Sea Reef system. So different communities will have to co-own these resources in terms of the fishing grounds, customarily in that case. So they have no choice but to have these co-owned sort of strategies that we help facilitate in WWF Fiji, for example. That understanding of that the localization of their actions is definitely going to impact not just their neighboring sort of fishing grounds, but like other communities, and in this case in the urban area, which is right down here, where a lot of the fish from here is being sold into, and where a lot of the fish is depended upon. So some of the other ways of integrated management is through, of course, community permanent protected areas. In Fiji, the laws are still being reviewed as we speak. So there's some old policies that, in terms of no-take zone, protected areas in the country are looked upon as negatively by communities because they have to waiver their fishing rights. So some of these. So community declaration of protected areas are a lot more revered, a lot more respected. So those have been some of the strategies that we've been looking at, and that has worked significantly and successfully with communities, dependent on baseline data that has been submitted to them, like information that has mentioned that these are significant areas for, say, shark and ray nurseries or turtle nesting sites, for example. As you can see, some pictures of some of those actions. And just to round off this presentation on a lot of the efforts that we have looked at has been at very community level, looking at them being able to strategize amongst themselves, but also involving the local government stakeholders as well as national government stakeholders, and looking at policies and reviewing of laws and policies that allow for the further impacting of these reef systems and of these biodiversity ecosystems that bring so much to communities, and that communities are well sort of aligned to in terms of their traditions and their cultures. I will just quickly run through. This is just a project that we're working on. Is in looking at a reconfigured sea cucumber value chain as an example of some of the strategies, but this is because of the fact that communities are so dependent on their natural resources for their livelihood. One of the things that we was looking at in terms of livelihood activities was the sea cucumber sort of industry here, and how it's being extracted unsustainably, and there are only a few sort of players benefiting from it all. So we will. There's been a study to look at how communities can support this sort of value chain in terms of the reconfiguration, and having sort of grow-out pens built and populated with juveniles, and then looking at how appropriately sized specimens can be harvested, and looking at the preparation phase as well as the value adding, and that the money is, or the resources are being channeled into the communities themselves instead of going through middlemen per se. So these are some of the things that we have to look into in terms of community engagement, to ensure that they are also that there are options for them, because if you close off something, that they are very reliant upon for their everyday lives, for the education of their children, there needs to be options for them to be able to look into as well for their own livelihoods. This is just a way that we were looking into in terms of strengthening marine management as a part of that business strategy that we were looking at, and just having enforcement and more enforcement as part of the business, but also part of the protected areas that the communities have set up. I'll just skip over this because this is just going into the details. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Taina. Again, that was a very insightful presentation. So in the first round, all of us have extracted quite a lot from our panelists on the vulnerability of coastal ecosystems, specifically mangroves, and the recommendations that they offered, which they think would influence the resilience of these critical yet very fragile ecosystem. I'll just go for a very quick rapid-fire round towards the end to extract very specific recommendation on this very important topic. We are sitting here at a very opportune moment. Tomorrow is the day one of COP, and I would like to round off this discussion before we get into the Q&A by asking the panelists to share their 1 or 2 point recommendation very briefly on if all of you were the COP28 presidency, what role would you see playing in reshaping the governance of coastal resilience for the Indo-Pacific region? In detail, specifically, what step or recommendation do you think can be taken to shift the paradigm towards a novel approach that integrates ecosystem-centered, community-based strategies for adaptation into coastal management and planning? Very briefly, it's not a detailed answer, just 1 or 2 points, specific recommendation from the standpoint of a COP presidency. I'll start with you, Dr. Hazra.
Thank you. While I definitely support the recommendations by Tai about ocean accounting for the sustainability and blue economy in a climate change world, I also try to emphasize from the coastal zone management point of view that our processes of risk assessment and adaptation in a specific system like Sundarban or in Bangladesh or in Sri Lanka or in Fiji has to be quick, as well as it has to be flexible. I mean, it can change very quickly with time. Not that I'll make a coastal zone management plan and it will remain valid for 25 years anymore. So, because just I want to give you an example that the first, India is the first to have a coastal zone regulation in 1991. And the West Bengal Coastal Zone Management Plan, any document on that, you will find it in 2016 in the public domain. And 2020, you have changed it because initially you have included Sundarban in the CRZ1, that is a protected area entirely, and now you have relaxed it, except for the mangrove areas, relaxed it definitely for the demand of the social and economic demand of the people, the 100 meter from both sides of the tidal creek. So you know that flexibility as well as timeliness of the adaptation measures are essential, and it is a global case that we do not incorporate climate change or climate adaptation in any of our city planning, business planning, or even in any part of ecosystem-based planning. And the second point that I want to make that, well, the coastal assessment, the process, and managing the coast, India has a 7,500 kilometer of coastline. So how much we have covered in coastal zone management plan? 500 meters from the sea facing thing. But if you are thinking of ecosystem-based management, if I am thinking about managing Sundarban with Bangladesh, so the start of the coastal processes start beyond the 500 meter regulated areas. So your management planning should start much beyond the coast, because from Sundarban you are carrying to Sundarban you are carrying the sewage from Calcutta. So your planning should start from Calcutta. Have a coastal zone management plan of Sundarban. And if I am talking about we are losing ground in Sundarban for the mangroves because of the 6 millimeter of sea level rise, then what we should do? We should maintain the elevation more than 6 millimeter per year. To do that, we need a freshwater and sediment supply from the apex of the delta. So if you have to save Sundarban, we have proven that Anurag has done a lot of from WWF, that we have placed some rings and seen that the island has still capability to accumulate silt 13 to 14 centimeter in a year. So think of the amount we are capable of ecologically addressing the loss of land if we can manage the ecosystem. So that is the message that I want to convey, that if you want to manage coastal zone, start managing from the upstream. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hazra. So, two takeaways: ocean accounting for a sustainable blue economy and the paradigm shift in the process of managing coast itself. Over to Professor Amarasinghe, 2-point recommendation, very brief and quick.
Yes, I agree with the previous speaker that management has to start not exactly at where the mangroves are, but further upstream or further around it. But there should be certain criteria that one has to keep in mind, particularly the hydrology, because in all these management strategies, hydrology is not taken into account. It's not taken for granted, because water falls on land and it goes wherever it goes, depending on the elevation and the topography and so on. But this is something that we overlook most of the time, and this is what we see in Sri Lanka too, that when they are planning upstream development activities, they don't consider at all what's happening downstream and where the water will flow and where will it go and accumulate and what kind of impacts that they will bring about and so on and so forth. So therefore, particularly for wetlands, hydrology is of utmost importance because water makes them alive. So therefore, if the quality of water goes down, it affects the services or the whole ecosystem. And if it, so therefore, it has to be given a priority, which is most of the time overlooked. So that's one thing. And the other one is, I agree with the previous speaker who said that it has to be a kind of a regional planning process that should include the wetlands in it, but not just the wetland area that you should think of in managing their resources for.
Thank you, Professor. A paradigm shift again in the process of managing coast has 2 votes here, and in addition, hydrology, particularly of the wetland, to be integrated into the coastal management. Dr. Taina, over to you.
Thank you very much, Aparna. So I will highlight one thing, which is promoting smart, innovative, and diverse financing mechanisms to support community-led climate change adaptation and mitigation initiatives for blue carbon ecosystems restoration and conservation. That is because traditional funding models often overlook small-scale, community-based projects, which are crucial for local resilience. So COP28 could recommend the establishment of dedicated funds or financial incentives for projects that integrate ecosystem conservation with community development, such as community managed mangrove restoration or sustainable coastal fisheries. And additionally, the conference could encourage public-private partnership and investment in nature-based solutions, leveraging private sector and innovative ways for community-centered mitigation adaptation efforts. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Taina. Again, a 3rd point coming out is promoting smart, innovative financing mechanism for the restoration of not just coastal ecosystem, but also boosting community resilience. Our last speaker, Ms. Unaisi, what would be your recommendation?
Thank you very much. So I think as part of the call from Pacific Island nations, all agree upon the fact that we are all pushing for the parties to ensure that all current and new commitments focus on 1.5 degrees as a matter of extreme global urgency and the impacts that beyond that will be devastating for any island ecosystem as well as across the world itself. And the second one I would be looking at right now is along the lines of the previous speakers, by looking at scaling up public finances by developed countries to support developing countries, and that would including support for advancing ocean climate action and resilience as indigenous peoples and local communities that are most vulnerable to these impacts must have timely timely and equitable access to ocean climate adaptation finance, technology transfer, and capacity building to scale up some of these adaptation and resilience actions. Thank you.
Thank you. So last one coming in here is finance from financial support from developed countries towards ocean climate adaptation plan. That sums up the moderated discussion. Aditya, go ahead.
Aditya Bhan from Observer Research Foundation, Kolkata. So I think Professor Amarasinghe had referred to smaller mangrove patches, right? So she gave an example from Sri Lanka, I think. So we similarly have a similar, small mangrove patch, let's say in Bombay. So, when it comes to managing these, smaller patches, which are often in very urbanized settings, are there certain specific nuances that should be addressed or that need to be addressed, is my question. I mean, from the perspective of your integrated coastal management, etc. So,
Professor Amarasinghe.
Yeah, actually, it's very difficult to manage very smaller areas because they are surrounded by people. They are like in Bombay, they are in urban areas or semi-urban areas, and sometimes very populated areas. So it's very difficult to protect and also to manage these areas because they will get affected by all the human activities that are happening around them. So therefore, it has to be, if one wants to manage a smaller patch, it should be a bigger area. It should be part of a bigger area. So therefore, when you are planning for a bigger area, you give due consideration for the existence of this smaller patch. Otherwise, you just can't separate it and do it different because it has to be part of a bigger landscape.
Thank you. Any other questions or intervention? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question for Professor Hazra. You were talking about the, the aquaculture that transfers the mangrove being converted. Now, there's a question of livelihood here, and perhaps that is something that we need also to think of. That's number one. Secondly, the thing is, it's not only about the aquaculture. What about the other ways of the mangrove forest being converted, like real estate? How do you look into those issues and to get back to the mangrove forests back?
Yes, mangrove forests are being transferred to different other land uses, particularly for agriculture, from long back, 200 years. It's a colonial model of converting non-paying mangrove forest to paying agriculture. So the same trend is continuing, that converting agriculture as well as mangroves to more paying aquaculture. So finally, what we feel that if there was no globalization in 1980, if there was no global demand of shrimp from Sundarbans, there might not be so much of mangrove destruction. But so that externalities of your subject is always there in our mangroves. Now the point is, how do you consider it? There is a restriction on the land use conversion, change of land use in Sundarban. You implement that simply. You don't allow people to convert from mangroves to aquaculture. There are people, there are question of livelihood, but as we have shown that with an agricultural farm, the number of families they get benefit are much more, but less profit from agricultural land than a particular person get from leasing that agricultural land and acquiring more profit, but a very small family or a single person. So that becomes an inequality in the profit accumulation. So these are the issues that you have to consider and have a conservation plan of mangroves, which includes at present that any kind of conversion of mangrove island or land use in Sundarban is illegal. So, but illegality is the law of the land.
Thank you, everyone. I hope there are no other questions because we have run out of time, but should applaud ourselves for being on time and finishing the session. Thank you very much, panelists, for such an insightful discussion. We have key takeaways, and we hope this translates into good policy recommendations in the form of a paper, and we hope to engage with you soon on the same topic. Thank you very much.